Welcome to Whispers at 3 a.m., where the mysteries never sleep. In this new series, follow Matt, a city kid sent to the countryside in the summer of 1992, as he's pulled into a chilling mystery hidden deep within the White Woods. It all began with an ancient well, and ended with his younger brother vanishing without a trace. Since that day, the nightmare has never stopped. Are you ready to step into the forest? Be careful. Once you hear the call from the bottom of the well, there's no turning back. I'm on a plane on the way to my hometown to solve a mystery that has been haunting me from a very young age. Let me to take you back so you can understand. I can still feel the grit of red clay under my fingernails when I think about it. Smell the sweet decay of hay in the barn. Hear the indignant squawks of chickens as we chase them around the pen. That old rooster, we called him Satan's alarm clock, would get so mad he'd turn purple under his feathers, pecking at our ankles until we scrambled over the fence like amateur acrobats. Looking back now, I realize that rooster taught us our first lesson about respect. Sometimes the smallest things can pack the meanest punch. I'm Matthew, Matt to most folks, and this is the story of how my brother Larry and I ended up on Grandpa Joe's cattle farm in the summer of 1992. We were city kids, soft-handed and Netflix addicted, until Grandpa's heart started giving out and Dad packed us up faster than a tornado warning. This farm's been in our family for 4 generations, he'd say, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, his knuckles went white. You boys are gonna learn how to run it right. The transition hit us like a brick wall. One day we were racing bikes down suburban streets. The next, we were mucking stalls and learning how to milk cows with hands that blistered and bled. Our closest neighbor was old Mr. Peterson, 5 miles down a dirt road that turned to soup every time it rained. Those first few weeks, we were so lonely, we started naming the chickens. Each one, all 30 of them. We gave them soap opera names, like The Bold and the Beautiful and Days of Our Lives characters. Though keeping track of who was who became impossible once we realized chickens all look pretty much the same when they're running away from you. But kids are resilient, like weeds growing through concrete. We discovered that mud fights were better than video games, that building forts from hay bales beat any playground equipment, that the stars out there were so bright they made the sky look overcrowded. We learned the hard way about electric fences. Larry's hair stood on end for hours, about how mama cows don't take kindly to strangers near their calves. I've never run so fast in my life. And about why you should always check your boots for spiders before putting them on. Poor Larry hopped around on one foot for a whole day after that one. Dad taught us to shoot that first summer, starting with tin cans and working our way up to hunting. The first time I dropped a deer, I cried and threw up in the bushes. Larry just stood there, quiet-like, the way he always got, when something big was happening. That day taught us about life and death in a way no video game ever could. We learned that food doesn't just appear in grocery stores, that taking a life means something, and that being tough isn't about not feeling. It's about feeling everything and still doing what needs to be done. We made plenty of mistakes that summer, like the time we decided to help by painting the barn with some old paint we found in the shed. Turns out it was primer, and rain washed it all away. Or when we thought we could ride one of the calves like a horse. Spoiler alert, you can't. Each scrape, bruise, and close call was a lesson wrapped in an adventure. We learned about consequences, about taking responsibility, about the difference between brave and foolish. Though sometimes the line between the two was about as clear as mud. Everything changed when Dad remembered his old buddy Jim lived just over the county line with his 2 kids. The day we met them, the air was thick enough to chew, and the cicadas were screaming their summer symphony. I remember standing in their gravel driveway, Larry hiding behind me like a shadow. Funny thing he was, never scared of anything, besides meeting new people. "Hey, I'm Matt. This is Larry," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. John, looked at us like we were something that fell off a tractor. "I'm Jonathan. This is Missy." His sister was staring at me with these huge brown eyes, like she was trying to memorize my face. "You guys ever catch frogs?" The disgust on John's face was priceless. "Why would anyone want to catch frogs?" "'Cause they're slippery and fast and make funny noises when you poke them. Come on." Our property was huge. We all ran over to the creek, a few minutes from my house. We spent hours splashing through the creek, pants rolled up to our knees, hollering every time someone caught one of those slick little jumpers. John went from disgusted to determined after Larry caught a monster bullfrog. Missy would sneak up behind us, free our captives, then run away, shrieking with laughter, while we chased her through the tall grass. By the time the sun set, we were covered in mud, mosquito bites, and the kind of friendship that feels like it's always been there. Those summer days stretched out like warm taffy, each one filled with new discoveries. We learned how to tell which clouds meant rain was coming, how to whistle through a blade of grass, how to catch fireflies without crushing them. We figured out that sometimes the best conversations happen in complete silence, sitting on a fence post, watching the sun paint the sky in colors no crayon could match. And most importantly, we learned that growing up isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. One scraped knee, one broken rule, one learned lesson at a time. That summer was the first time I heard anything about the White Woods. Larry and Missy were down in the creek, splashing around and collecting tadpoles in their plastic buckets, their excited voices carrying across the yard. I remember standing there in the tall grass, swatting at mosquitoes, when something caught my eye at the edge of our property. There, rising up against the deep green of the regular forest, stood a cluster of trees that looked wrong somehow. Their bark was bleached and pale, like sun-dried bones left too long in the desert. They formed a perfect wall. They were maybe a mile or so from our land, and something about the way they seemed to glow in the afternoon light made my stomach twist. I turned to John, who was sitting cross-legged in the grass beside me, furiously scratching at the constellation of bug bites on his arms. I smacked his hand away and pointed over to the site. "Hey, what's that over there? We haven't gone exploring in that part yet, have we?" John kept scratching, pretending not to hear me, like he usually did when he was in one of his moods. But when he finally looked up, his whole body went stiff. The color drained from his face, making his freckles stand out like dots of rust. Just stay away from those woods, okay?" His voice had that weird, grown-up tone he sometimes used when he was trying to act older than his 12 years. "Kids aren't supposed to play there." "How come?" I pressed, suddenly more interested than ever. Anything that could spook my usually unflappable brother was worth investigating. "People go missing in there." He picked at a blade of grass, not meeting my eyes. "Like, a lot of people." "Yeah, but how come?" I scooted closer, lowering my voice even though Larry and Missy were too far away to hear. John shrugged, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. "Nobody knows for sure. At least that's what the cops say. Some folks think there's something in there, like a monster or whatever. Or maybe just some crazy person living out there, picking people off." "Like Jason?" I whispered, thinking of the horror movie Dad definitely didn't know we'd watched at our sleepover last week. "Yeah," John said, finally looking at me with serious eyes. "Maybe something even worse." Later that day, I asked my dad about it, and this is the response I got. "Never go in, not even a step. There's things in there," he'd say, his voice getting quiet, like it did when he talked about Mom. "Dangerous animals and stuff, all right." That was the most I got out of anyone for a while. 8th grade started that fall, and suddenly our little group was inseparable. Me and Larry joined football because John wouldn't shut up about it, though basketball was our true love. Larry got picked on by some giants until he figured out how to use their size against them during tackling drills. He'd wait until they were charging full speed, then duck and roll at the last second, sending them face first into the mud. John and I would laugh so hard we'd get extra laps. After school, we would all go hang out at my house, but eventually my dad would complain about all the noise we would make, and sometimes we'd get bored of playing outside. That's when we found this spot in the town library, behind the encyclopedias where Mrs. Shank couldn't see us, where we'd read comic books and trade cards and plan our weekend adventures. When we weren't chasing each other with sticks and exploring the countryside, we were in the library. That's when the White Woods came up again. Larry and John were hunched over their new Pokemon cards in our usual library corner, trading whispers about rare hollows, while Missy was giving me a crash course in local history. Being from the city, I never really cared about where I came from. But small towns are different. People here actually get excited about this stuff. Maybe it's pride, or maybe they're just really, really bored. Hey, Matt. Want to hear something weird? Missy's eyes lit up the way they always did before sharing some random fact. Hit me. I nodded, trying not to smile. Everyone else always shut her down when she got like this, which is probably why she kept coming to me. You know how everyone's always like, stay out of the White Woods. She leaned in closer. That's actually why this town exists in the first place. Now that got my attention. Wait, what? Yeah, according to this book, the founders were totally... She squinted at the page. Enamored, I finished, trying not to laugh. She punched my arm. Hard enough to mean it. Soft enough to be friendly. Know-it-all, she muttered. That's when Scott from the football team poked his head around the bookshelf. We weren't like enemies or anything, but we weren't exactly hanging out at lunch either. You guys talking about the White Woods? His voice had that trying to be casual tone that meant he was dying to say something. Missy rolled her eyes. No, we're discussing physics. Scott ignored her sarcasm and squeezed into our corner anyway. My dad swears there's monsters in there. Now that was the kind of small-town stuff I lived for. Coming from the city, where the scariest thing was probably the subway at 3 a.m., this was gold. For real? What kind? Skinwalker, Scott whispered, like the word itself might summon something. Dad heard it himself. Said it was making animal noises, but wrong. Like something pretending to be an animal. You know? Oh, please. I tried to sound unimpressed, but honestly, I was already hooked. If there was anything like that out there, don't you think someone would have gone all Monster Hunter on it by now? But I heard. John looked up from his Charizard. Scott, my man, no one wants to hear your kindergarten campfire stories. The thing is, I kind of did. I guess you could say this is when my obsession with the White Woods started. Mrs. Shank told us we ought to keep ourselves from talking about the White Woods. She seemed serious. Even now, when I look back on the memory, I can remember her harsh tone. At least as of that moment, my thirst for the unknown had been quenched. The oak tree on our farm became our sanctuary that summer. We climbed it one scorching afternoon, helping each other up until we found this perfect spot near the top, where the branches made a natural platform. I pulled out Dad's pocket knife, the one he still doesn't know I borrowed, and we carved our names deep into the bag. Mine, Larry's, John's, and Missy's, all inside a rough heart. Now, we're all gonna be best friends forever, Missy declared. We had a million little adventures that year. Like the time we tried to ride one of the calves and ended up covered in more manure than cow. Or when we built a raft for the creek using old barrels and rope, only to have it sink the moment John stepped on it. We caught fireflies in mason jars, learned to whistle with grass between our thumbs, and once tried to teach a chicken to play fetch. His name was Professor Clux, and he was not a good student. The White Woods wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale trees reaching toward the sky. I started asking questions at school, but people would just shut down. Teachers would change the subject. Students would suddenly remember somewhere else they needed to be. Their reactions only made it worse. Like picking at a scab, I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. John was the one who finally cracked. He might have been held back a year, but that kid was sharp as a tack when something caught his interest. We were all like that, I guess. Once we latched onto something, we'd follow it straight off a cliff if we had to. You're still hung up on the White Woods thing, aren't you? He caught me between classes, shoulders tense. Come on, you know how it is. The more people dodge my questions, the more I want answers. I tried to laugh it off, but John wasn't smiling. He grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. Listen, man, I'm telling you this as a friend. Let it go. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. My old man, he was a cop here before you moved to town. Started poking around about some disappearances near those woods. Something in John's expression made me queasy. What happened to him? Died in a shootout. Only one we've ever had in this town. John's fingers dug into my arm. Funny timing, right? Started asking questions. Then suddenly, he trailed off, swallowing hard. Don't you want to know why? The words slipped out before I could stop them. I mean, if it was my dad. No, John cut me off. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw real fear in his eyes. I don't. And that's the God's honest truth. He let go of my arm, but the weight of his words stayed with me. Looking at him then, I realized this wasn't just another ghost story. This was my friend, trying to protect me from something that still haunted him. Something that had torn a hole in his life that would never quite heal. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up. You know that itch in the back of your mind when you just know there's more to the story? Yeah, that one. John and I had lunch together that day. Larry and Missy were stuck in a different period. It wasn't the first time we'd skipped, and it probably wouldn't be the last. There was this bathroom at the back of the school with a window that hadn't latched right since forever. One quick jump, and we were free. We wandered through town like we owned the place. The fall air had that perfect crispness to it, the kind that makes you feel alive. We talked about the usual stuff at first. How much homework sucked. How Mr. Peterson's history class felt like it lasted approximately 3 years. And how being 13 was basically the worst thing ever. Looking back now, those were some of the best days of my life. Just 2 kids with nowhere to be and nothing but time. But this time was different. John let something slip that would change everything. You guys ever show me all the cool spots around here? I asked, kicking a rock down the sidewalk. Feel like we must have missed something. John hesitated, scuffing his sneakers against the concrete. I mean, there's the old town well, but nobody really... My head snapped up. Well? What well? Forget it, he mumbled, suddenly super interested in his shoelaces. Come on, what? Don't be a wuss. I punched his arm, maybe a little harder than I meant to. He got me back just as good, and we both stood there, rubbing our arms like the idiots we were. Okay. He glanced around like someone might be listening. It's in the White Woods. used to be this whole thing where kids would try to find it, like a dare or whatever. But then, he lowered his voice. This kid went out there, Jerry or something. When they found him 2 days later, he was totally messed up, like straight up crazy. Kept babbling about these tunnels under the ground and these things he saw. I felt my heart speed up. Wait. Isn't that exactly what Scott was talking about? The stuff his dad mentioned? Scott's full of it, John said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. But what if he's not? I stopped walking and grabbed John's sleeve. Think about it. What if there's actually something out there? We could be the ones to figure it all out. We'd be like those kids from the movies who solve the big mystery. John's face did this weird dance between excitement and terror. I don't know, man. Just imagine if we found something huge. Everyone would have to know who we are then. I knew I was pushing it, but I couldn't help myself. No more being the new kid, I added quietly. We stood there for a minute, just letting that sink in. Then I got that feeling, the one where you just know you're about to do something either really awesome or really stupid. My dad won't be home for hours, I said. Come on. We ran all the way to my house, our backpacks bouncing against our backs. The whole time, my mind was racing with possibilities. Once we got there, I dug out my pocket knife I took from my dad, and we climbed up to my roof spot. From there, you could see the whole town, including the white woods looming at the edge like a dark wall. I watched John stare at the woods. He looked scared, but there was something else there too, like he wanted to be brave, but didn't know how. We need to make this official, I said, flipping open the knife. What are you? Oh my God. Matt, no! John's eyes went wide as I drew the blade across my palm. It stung like crazy, and I tried not to show how much it hurt. John, I said, trying to sound like the heroes in those old movies my dad loved. You're my best friend. More than that, you're my brother now, and I swear, no matter what happens, I'll make sure you're okay, even if I have to get hurt instead. That's a promise. You're insane, he whispered, but he was looking at me like nobody had ever offered to protect him before. His hand shook as he held it out. I made the cut as quick and shallow as I could, but he still yelped. When we pressed our palms together, it felt like something bigger than us was happening. John started crying. Not loud sobs or anything, just quiet tears that made me realize how much this meant to him. We spent the rest of the afternoon drinking Kool-Aid and playing video games, trying to act tough about our cut hands, even though they hurt like hell. When my dad got home, he went ballistic about us skipping school, but it was worth it. The next day in the town library, we brought it up to Larry and Missy. We were all crammed into our usual corner. No way, Missy said immediately, shaking her head so hard her braids whipped around. Absolutely not. Are you guys crazy? Larry perked up, though, especially after John told the story about the missing kid. What if he found something real? Larry asked, leaning in close. Like, what if there's treasure down there or something? Or what if he got eaten by whatever lives in those woods? Missy shot back. Come on, Missy, I pleaded. We need you. You're the only one who actually knows how to read a compass. Yeah, and you're way braver than any of us, John added. That's exactly why I should stay behind and tell everyone where to look for your bodies. It took almost an hour of begging, promising, and straight-up manipulation before she finally cracked. "Fine," she exploded, throwing her hands up. "But only because you idiots would probably get yourselves killed without me." We spent the rest of lunch planning. John said he could swipe some spray paint from his dad's garage, the good kind that glows in the dark. I'd bring my knife and enough snacks to last us through the apocalypse. Larry would grab our dad's old flashlights from our barn, and Missy, still grumbling, agreed to bring her compass and the detailed map of the area she'd gotten from her scout troop. The plan was simple. Meet up at sunrise, when the light would be good enough to see, but early enough that no one would miss us. We'd head into the White Woods, find the well, and make history. None of us slept that night. How could we? The next day we'd either be heroes, or we'd end up like Jerry, or whatever his name is, if he was even real. But sitting there in my room, staring at the bandage on my palm, I knew there was no backing out now. We had a blood pact, after all, and those things were sacred. At least, they were in the movies. Then came March 22nd, 1993, the day we went into those God-forsaken woods. The air was different that morning. Heavy, like before a storm, but the sky was clear enough to hurt your eyes. We walked through the long grass on our property. The White Woods surrounded a part of it, but it was still about a 10 or 20-minute walk before you hit the wood. We wandered closer to the edge of the White Woods than we usually dared. The encroaching feeling that we were about to do something that couldn't be undone, consuming us. It was too late to turn back. My fascination had taken over. Before I knew it, my feet were stepping on branches that snapped and cracked, and we were venturing into the White Woods. Time went strange in there. The trees all looked the same, their white bark glowing faintly in the dim light. Their branches twisted and turned, like skeleton arms reaching out for us, trying to claim us and keep us here. We walked around for what felt like hours, but the sun hadn't moved in the patches of sky we could see through the canopy. The air got thicker, older somehow, like the stuff you breathe in abandoned houses. I was almost ready to call it quits and turn around, following the red X's John sprayed on the trees, but then heard it. A sound that made the hair on my arms stand up and my stomach turn to ice. It was like a goat's bleat, but wrong, like someone trying to imitate a goat while crying. Before any of us could react, Missy was running toward it, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner. Larry took off after her, calling her name. John and I looked at each other, and in that moment, we were just scared kids. We ran after them, branches whipping our faces, roots trying to trip us. The White Woods had swallowed us whole. The bleating drew us deeper into the woods, each step taking us further from the safety of daylight that filtered through the canopy above. The sound was wrong somehow. Too human, too knowing. We found Larry and Missy at the edge of a clearing, their bodies rigid like deer catching a predator's scent. As we approached, I saw what had stopped them cold. A well, ancient and half swallowed by the forest. Gnarled trees had grown around it over decades, maybe centuries, their roots crawling over the stonework like possessive fingers, trying to drag it into the earth. That awful bleating echoed out from its depths, bouncing off the old stones until it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A rope stretched from the mouth of the well and stared into a perfect circle of darkness. Larry was already climbing down it. Missy followed. Something about the well's mouth made my vision swim, like looking into an optical illusion that refused to resolve itself. My stomach churned with a sickness that felt older than my body, older than the trees themselves. I wanted to follow Larry down. He was my brother after all. But my muscles had turned to water. The goat's cries grew more desperate, more human, until the rope suddenly went still in my hands. The silence that followed was worse than any sound I'd ever heard. "Larry!" My voice cracked. "Larry, are you okay?" Missy's scream shattered the air like breaking glass. It wasn't the kind of scream you make when you're startled. It was the sound of someone's mind trying to reject what their eyes were seeing. John's hands clamped down on the rope, his knuckles white with tension. He gave me one last look, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A kind of desperate courage that knew it was about to die. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness below. The rope played out through my trembling hands, feet after foot, until I couldn't see him anymore. The sounds that drifted up from below weren't natural. Wet shuffling and occasional groans that might have been human, but somehow weren't. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but Larry was down there. My brother. I took one step toward the well, and my body revolted. Cold sweat broke out across my skin, and my vision tunneled. Even at 12 years old, I recognized this feeling for what it was, the same instinct that made our ancestors flee from shadows in the night, that taught us to fear what lurked in deep waters and dark caves. The rope jerked violently, and I stumbled backward. John emerged like a drowning man, breaking the surface, his arms scrabbling at the well's rim. He hauled himself out and turned to help Missy. But when they both stood before me, my heart stopped. No, Larry, the space where my brother should have been, yawned like an open wound. Missy's face was blank, wiped clean of everything that made her Missy. The rest of that night blurs at the edges, like a dream that doesn't want to be remembered. I remember fighting with John, begging him to let me go after Larry. The fear in my chest had hardened into something sharp and desperate. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that every second we waited was 1 second too many. But John grabbed my shoulders, spun me around, and pointed at Missy. "You see her?" His voice shook. "I don't know what they saw down there, but I've never seen her like this. We were just kids, sure, but Missy was the one who climbed trees to the highest branches, who once punched some bully for killing a frog with a rock. She went down that well, eager to save whatever was making those sounds. Now she stood there, trembling, her eyes fixed on something none of us could see. Whatever waited in that darkness had broke her. We ran. By the time we broke through to open ground, night had fallen completely. My father stood at the tree line, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, his face tight with worry that melted into relief when he saw us. Then he counted heads, and that relief curdled into something else entirely. What happened next plays like a series of disconnected snapshots in my memory. My father sitting us down, his voice stern but trembling, as he made us swear never to speak of what happened. Him disappearing into the darkness with a rope and flashlight of his own. The hours of waiting, each minute stretching like taffy. When he finally came back alone, something had changed in him too. I watched from the stairs as he poured himself drink after drink, muttering into his glass. Just once, I saw him smile, a terrible, knowing smile that belonged on someone else's face. "My boy," he whispered. "My boy made it to the room before me." I didn't understand what he meant then. Part of me hoped I never would. The years after Larry disappeared blend together like watercolors in the rain. I spent most of them in that old oak tree, staring into the woods until my eyes hurt, hoping against hope that my brother would just walk out. It's weird the way trauma can affect a person, isn't? Specifically friendships. It either breaks or makes it right. You're so close together after having to depend on each other for survival. Or it puts a permanent brand on the friendship that is so vile that every time you think of that person, you can't avoid thinking of the event associated with that friendship. I guess that's what happened to our friendship. The event was so horrific in the context of real-life horror that we couldn't look past it. I spent 3 years pretty much alone. I had become an outcast. Sure, it seemed like I had given up on Larry, and maybe I had for a time there. But deep down, I always knew something greater than I could ever understand happened to Larry. And I knew if I didn't pursue it, no one would. I studied occult obsessively, but to no avail. I couldn't find anything about a well or a creature that resides in one. This only further pushed me being an outcast. No one wants to talk to weird, quiet kid who's obsessed with ghosts and ghastly creatures. I got kind of used to it for a while there. John, Missy and me would pass each other in the halls, trade quick glances, but the weight of what happened kept us from really talking, at least until I was 16. I was hiding out in the library that summer, buried in textbooks. Maybe if I studied hard enough, I could forget. That's when I heard footsteps approaching my table. Matt, John's voice was barely above a whisper. He stood there awkwardly, hands shoved deep in his pockets, while Missy lingered a step behind him. I didn't look up. "What do you want?" "We miss you, man." John pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "It's been forever." "Yeah, well, Dad made it pretty clear I'm supposed to stay away from you guys. Something about leading us into the White Woods?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "That's not." John's face twisted like he'd tasted something sour. "You know that's not how it happened. Missy and Larry. Just say his name," I snapped, finally meeting his eyes. "Larry, my brother, the one we lost down there. Look, I'm not mad anymore, okay? But Dad's made up his mind." Missy stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "And you're just gonna let him control your life like that? Don't you think it's weird that he told us to keep quiet about Larry? About everything?" Of course I thought it was weird. That question had been eating away at me for 3 years. But what was I supposed to do? Challenge my father? I'd been just a kid, convinced that following his rules meant being a good son. Now I was starting to see how thoroughly he'd gotten inside my head. We talked for hours that day, huddled in the back of the library where no one could hear us. When Missy finally told me what she'd seen down in that well, my whole world tilted sideways. No goat, no simple hole in the ground. Instead, she described a nightmare of tunnels spreading out like spider webs, pitch black and endless. She'd seen Larry being dragged into that darkness, his hand reaching back toward her. Something had tried to take her too, but Larry, my brave, stupid brother, had helped her fight it off. By the time John made it down, all he found was Missy sobbing at the bottom. The strangest part, John hadn't heard a sound. The goat, nothing. That's when the questions really started piling up. Why had Dad been so insistent about our silence? Why did he seem to age 10 years overnight after Larry disappeared? We decided to go to the police. Consequences be damned. The sheriff listened to our story with the kind of smile adults reserve for children telling ghost stories. Sure, people disappeared in the White Woods. That's why folks stayed away. But tunnels? Underground passages? Pure fantasy, he said. We must have sounded crazy, but we weren't suggesting anything supernatural. Maybe someone was living down there. Maybe that explained all the disappearances. We dug through old police reports and newspaper archives, looking for patterns. That's when things got really strange. Larry was an outlier. Most victims were adults, not children. But one case grabbed me by the throat and wouldn't let go. A man who'd vanished in the woods while with his son, Jeremy. The son came back, but he was never the same. He kept running away from his foster home, always heading back to the woods. The first mention of the well appeared in his file. Jeremy, redacted, age 14, found at the Old Town Well in the White Woods, catatonic. They'd locked him up in the local psychiatric hospital. a place I hadn't even known existed until then. Now, he was our parents' age, still institutionalized. But he had a sister, someone close to our age, but a little older. I tapped John's shoulder. "Isn't this the kid you told me about a couple years back? You thought his name was Jerry. It's Jeremy." "Really?" "Yeah, that kid? Sucks we can't talk to him, huh?" "Well, it says here he has a younger sister. She's about 20. John and I exchanged looks, a plan already forming. Missy saw it in our faces and started shaking her head before we could even speak. It took an hour of arguing and planning before she agreed to try talking to him. We'd wait outside, ready to jump in if anything went wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Dad was in his usual spot by the window, bourbon in hand, rocking slightly as he stared into the darkness of the woods. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair. My heart was pounding as I approached him. "Dad," I said softly, "what really happened to Larry?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "What's in that well?" He turned just enough for me to catch his bloodshot eyes, then went back to his vigil. "So young," he murmured. "So many questions." Something inside me snapped. "You know something. You've known all along." The words came out in a rush, years of bottled rage spilling over. "My brother is gone, and you're just sitting here, drinking, doing nothing. You're supposed to be our father." I expected him to explode, to match my anger with his own. Instead, he seemed to collapse in on himself, shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. He took another long drink, his hand trembling. "You could never understand," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The choices I've made, it's all so much bigger than us, Matthew. So much bigger." He closed his eyes, looking ancient and broken. "Go to bed." That night, lying in my room, I felt different about Larry for the first time in years. Usually, thinking about him was like pressing on a bruise, a dull, familiar pain. But now I can almost hear him calling to me, his voice echoing up from somewhere deep and dark. "Help me. Come find me." In my dreams, I still hear it sometimes, the bleating of an unseen goat, and my brother's terrified screams fading into the blackness. But now I wonder if they're really dreams at all. We met at the oak tree just as the morning fog was lifting. The dew still clung to the grass, dampening our shoes as we huddled together, going over our plan one last time. The ride to the mental hospital felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the anticipation, or maybe it was just the summer heat beating down on us as we pedaled for what seemed like forever. An hour ride into town, just for it to slowly disappear behind us as we made our way up a winding hill, our legs burning with each push. Melancholy's Peak. That's what the sign said, or what was left of it anyway. The wood was rotting, letters barely hanging on, as if the place itself was trying to fade away from existence. It sat there at the top of the hill, like some forgotten castle, all brick and iron windows, watching over the town below. They'd built it up here on purpose, I figured. Out of sight, out of mind. We propped our bikes against the rusted fence. Missy's hands were shaking as she tried to smooth down her borrowed dress. She looked nothing like herself. More like someone playing dress-up, trying too hard to look proper. I'd never seen her so nervous.